Уважаемые коллеги, профессор Филлип Сли, добрый день, добрый вечер, доброе утро. Мы вас, команда образовательной
We
онлайн-платформы.
are the SCLAD International Online Training Program welcome you on the second day of our international webinar series, International Online Webinar Series. This is international initiative against bullying. We do this in cooperation with the Public Foundation of International Academy of Sciences, Psychology, Engineering, and Pedagogy, and the CEO of this foundation welcomed us yesterday and wished us good work. For those of you who connected us today only, I would like to remind you that SCLAD is an educational online platform for a national dialogue for professionals in the field of education. This is an ecosystem of projects that help educational professionals to be aware of the international trends and innovations. We organize international training courses, webinar series, conferences, workshops, hackathons. We organize online training courses. We cooperate with professional communities of educators from Europe, Asia, and America. We operate as technical and information partners. On the slide, you can see the projects that we have implemented within the last 3 years of our online activities. We had the number of participants which exceeded 33,000 already, and yesterday we made a profile of a typical participant of our webinar series, and we have psychologists, teachers, teaching staff, professors, associate professors from universities, administrators and educators, students, students of master programs, managers of educational institutions, and all those who have joined our webinar series. We're also very happy to welcome our experts, our presenters. We're having 17 experts from 10 countries: Australia, Brazil, UK, Ireland, Spain, Italy, Canada, USA, Finland, Sweden. And yesterday we had a meeting, the first meeting with Madame Judy French, who made our figures alive. And briefly speaking, we yesterday have updated our knowledge, and thank you very much for your activity and interactivity. We had a record-breaking number of questions in the chat. Yesterday, we reviewed the typical characteristics of bullying, like hurting or harming other person physically or emotionally. The subject of bullying cannot stop this behavior and can hardly protect him or herself, and there's a disbalance of power between the parties in bullying. And the main conclusions represented by Judy, that bullying is a learned behavior, and this behavior can be changed. All adults are responsible, and they play their role in this process. And a child is never responsible for changing what is happening in the bullying situation. Judy was telling us that it was our responsibility to prevent and to address this challenge, and how this is going to happen would depend on us only. And I would like to tell you the agenda for today. We have a hectic day. We're having 3 meetings from Australia to the United States of America. In the middle, we have Brazil. We welcome our presenters, and it is my great pleasure to introduce you Professor and Director of the Research Center of the Student Wellbeing and Violence Prevention from the Flinders University from Australia, Dr. Phillip Slee. Today we are going to review the following issues. You can see them on the screen. Trends and the dimensions for improving the well-being of students in Australia, awareness about bullying and strategies to prevent it in Australia, school program called P.E.A.C.E, a new curriculum and training program to improve well-being of students, training of teachers, and certainly we will have a Q&A session at the end. Before we give the floor to Dr. Slee, I'd like to remind you that our meeting is simultaneously interpreted into Russian and English. If you need simultaneous interpretation, please click the globe button called Interpretation. Please select the Russian channel, disable the original audio, and then you'll be able to hear the interpreter. If you're going to listen to the presentation in English, you please stay in the English channel. Please use the chat function to write your questions or comments. If you use your smartphones today, you please click 3 dots to choose different features. So I'm passing the floor to Dr. Slee. Good morning. How are you doing today?
Good morning. It's lovely to have this opportunity to chat and to be with you all. And I'd like to thank the organisers for the conference. It's a wonderful and exciting opportunity to spend time with teachers and psychologists and other individuals working in Kazakhstan's schools. So thank you very much. One of the things that I would like to do is also thank the Daria and Tatiana, particularly for the kind introduction that they've made to the presentation tonight. So my intention in this presentation is to provide you with some ideas. I really appreciate the time that people are taking to attend this particular webinar, time out of very busy schedules in schools, and to attend this seminar. So one of the things that I would like to take away from it as well is that I would regard what I'm doing as an opportunity for co-learning. So the opportunity to share with you some ideas and get your thoughts through the chat and through contacting me afterwards, if that's what you would like to do. But also I would hope to learn from you about the kinds of teaching practices that you have in your schools, the approaches that you're taking to the issue of bullying and how to promote well-being. So if you like, I can give you a little bit of background. My background is in secondary school teaching. So I was a geography and history teacher working in secondary schools for a period of time. And that then took me in different directions. So with the background in teaching, one of the interests that I had was in teacher training. So that then led me into the university setting and to be involved in training of undergraduate teachers in their chosen vocation of teaching. Along that way, I also developed a particular interest in working with neuroatypical children. So I have a particular interest in young people on the autism spectrum. That was part of my experience in teaching and in the classroom context that I was working there with children and with young people who had been identified and diagnosed as on the spectrum. So a particular interest of mine is neuroatypical children. One of the ways that I wanted to approach this whole webinar series, though, was to also share some ideas and thoughts around particular programs that we've got. So as the kind introduction made clear, what I would like to do is take you through some background to what's happened here in Australia and the timeline involved in developing some background and some understanding of the issue of school bullying and promoting well-being. I'd also then like to provide along the way opportunity to pause and think about a number of different questions that have arisen and that challenge me still. So I'm in your hands in terms of advice that you might like to offer around these questions that I would have in my presentation. And then certainly at the end, I'd like to allow more than sufficient time to talk about some of the policy and some of the practices in classrooms, because I think from my perspective as a teacher, one of the really important things to do is provide kind of practical, in the classroom kind of context ideas for how a teacher could address the issue of school bullying and violence, and at the same time promote the well-being of children. So I hope that gives you a little bit of a background to my presentation tonight. So now what I'll try and do is share the screen with you and my presentation. So hopefully this will all happen.
Professor Slee, we see the English version of your presentation. Could you please show the Russian one?
Show the Russian one. Okay.
Right, if you open the English version.
Yep. So I'll just end that show, and I need to go back to.
Yeah, you need to stop sharing and open the translated version of the presentation.
Yeah, the translated version. Okay, so do the Russian. So there we are. Okay. Apologies for that little glitch.
Great, perfect. And could you please right now put it in the full screen?
So as I've said, my background is in teaching and secondary school teaching, but I have also been involved in teacher training, and that's my current position at Flinders University. One of the things that we would like to do, and I would like to do, is acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the Aboriginal people, and I'm making this presentation, and I'd like to acknowledge the elders of the Aboriginal people who are the past and present and emerging. So just to give you a little bit of background to the situation in Australia, we have over 9,000 schools right across Australia. The school system is predominantly public, which provides free education for students.
Professor Slee, can you hear my voice? I'm sorry to interrupt you, but
there's also an independent component that's made up of Catholic and non-denominational schools. So there are over 3 million students in our schools that attend either the public schools or the independent schools or the Catholic schools. In addition to that, we have about 6% of students who would identify themselves as Indigenous, and their background is Aboriginal, and they generally attend the public schools and the Catholic schools. So with that,
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Could you please, Денис, пожалуйста, не разговаривайте. Could you please switch to the English channel, because our interpretation does not work because you are in the Russian channel right now.
Okay. So I'll stop sharing.
Right, please stop sharing and then click on the interpretation button and choose the English channel.
Yeah, okay.
Because our interpretation is not simultaneous right now. Click on the interpretation and choose English, please.
Yes. So I've done that. So I'll go back
English
to
channel
sharing
speaking.
the screen.
Do you copy? Dr. Slee, do you copy? Dr. Slee, do you copy? This is English channel speaking. Dr. Slee, do you copy?
Yes, I understand. So I've switched now to English only.
Thank you.
Yeah. So to give you a little bit of background then from what I've just spoken about, how did Australia get to be where it's got to be? Well, in 1994, we had a federal inquiry. So this is a Commonwealth of Australia inquiry into the issue of school violence. So parliamentarians visited all of the states and territories in Australia to find out what teachers and others working in schools had to say about the issue of school violence and bullying. In 1994, the conclusion was at that point that school violence, the actual violence, was not a significant issue in Australian schools, but certainly that bullying was. And so what happened then was that in 2003, there was created at the Commonwealth or the national level by the Australian Parliament what was called the first National Safe Schools Framework. Now, the first National Safe Schools Framework was designed to make sure that schools were places where students could attend and that they could then attend their lessons and their classrooms safely and without fear that they would be bullied or that they would be harassed in any particular fashion. And so that happened in 2003. In 2007, what happened there was that there was a further development at the national level, and that development built on the National Safe Schools Framework. And what it did was shift the focus as well to providing a mental health framework where schools and their teachers were charged with the responsibility of providing not only a safe environment, but one where children and young people could flourish and grow and develop. And so from 2007, with a nationally agreed definition of bullying in place, with a national definition of well-being in place, the focus has been on the development of the resources then for teachers in schools so that they can provide opportunities for children to come to school and young people to come to school and to attend school free from bullying, but and also promote their well-being. And so the focus very much is on evidence-based. So what is the evidence that these programs and that these policies are actually making a difference? So that's the focus up until 2023 at the moment. What that has meant is that...
Professor Slee, просим прощения.
Professor Slee, we beg your pardon. Could you please disable the English version of the presentation and switch the Russian one, the translated one, because you'll launch the original presentation. Could you please switch into the translated version, please?
Okay. Okay, so okay, sorry about this. So this is the translated version. So that is the translated version.
Супер, на весь экран, если можно.
Super, please go full screen. Expand it,
Yep,
please.
I can. Okay.
Нет, это тоже английская версия.
Don't you think it's an English version again? It is. Professor Slee, this is the English version. Could you please disable this one and select the downloaded one, the translated one? Thank you.
Okay. Okay.
Уважаемые коллеги, я думаю, что...
Distinguished colleagues, I believe everything is okay, but this is only a hiccup. As you know, we have different stages And sometimes it must be challenging for presenters to launch presentations in the other language. Thank you for your understanding.
Okay. So my understanding was that this was the translated version.
Professor Slee, if that
Если
would
вам
be
будет
more
удобно,
convenient
мы
for you, our
продемонстрируем
technical
русскую
moderator
презентацию, а
could
вы
show
просто
the
будете
translated version
говорить
on the screen, and
следующий
you could
слайд,
work
если вам
just
так
with
удобно.
your English version opened on your computer, and you just need to say next slide.
Okay, so that's where I go back to my English version.
Нет, вы не возвращайтесь, мы продемонстрируем на экране русское, а вы смотрите там.
No, we will broadcast your presentation in Russian, and you will tell us to switch to the next slide. You tell us when the next slide should be switched on. Okay.
Okay.
Спасибо.
Thank you.
И мы можем тогда продолжать.
So we can continue.
Okay. So next slide. Okay, so we have a little problem here okay, there we go. So what I have up there at the moment is the Russian version of the program. So I actually need the English version so that I can understand what I'm talking about. So can you help me with this? Because what I have in front of me now is the Russian translation.
Right, Professor Slee, could you please
Вы можете у себя тогда, профессор Сли, открыть англоязычную версию,
and then you can just open the English version just on your computer and work according to it. And our technical moderator will show the Russian slides for the audience.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Okay, so I'll just open up my English version.
Yeah, just for yourself. And then when you switch the slide, please say next slide, and we will change the slide for the audience.
Okay. Okay. So that's where we're up to in the presentation now. So the questions that I would put to the attendees tonight or today in Kazakhstan is, if a student is being bullied in your school, who else is being bullied in school? Because usually when bullying is happening, it's not only happening to the student, but it may be happening to other teachers, it may be happening to parents, it may be happening to the principal or the deputy principal of the school. So one question to consider if students are reporting that they're being bullied is to ask, well, who else in the school is being bullied? Are the teachers being bullied by parents? Are the parents being bullied by the teachers? Is the principal being bullied by teachers? So bullying is a systemic thing, and that's what I'll talk a little bit about. Another question concerns who knows about the bullying. So if bullying is happening in the school, who is aware of it? Is the student aware of it? Are teachers aware of it? Do the teachers, the parents know about it? And so on. Another question that arises is, what would stop you as a teacher or others talking about the bullying? Because sometimes bullying is something that is really hidden, particularly amongst secondary or older students. They often feel ashamed or embarrassed by the issue of bullying. And because they feel embarrassed or ashamed, they don't talk about it. So therefore, no one actually knows that it's happening. So a question that I'd have for people attending the webinar tonight is, in addition to those three questions, what other questions would you ask as a teacher or a psychologist in your schools? Next slide, please. Now, a practical classroom activity that I often use in schools is to find out a little more about the bullying, is to have a map of the school. So in the Australian context, we can download maps of school that show the playground and the buildings, areas where the kids go at recess time and lunchtime to have their lunch. And what I do is ask the students, or the teachers will ask the students, to colour in areas of their school green, where the students always feel safe. It's a place where they feel comfortable, they like going there at recess time or lunchtime or during break time, and they colour that area green. In other areas, they might colour them yellow. Those are areas in the school where they only feel safe sometimes. So it might be that walking down the corridor in the school, they don't always feel safe, and they might colour the corridors in yellow. And then there are areas of the school that are red, coloured by the students. And those are areas where the students feel very unsafe. That is not a place where they feel safe from bullying, where they feel comfortable to be. And so with that practical activity in mind, you as a classroom teacher, as illustrated in the picture here, can sit down and talk with your students and talk about where they've coloured in the areas of the school as green or yellow or red. And you could ask the students and have a class activity based around, okay, how can we make areas of the school that you've coloured yellow or red as only safe sometimes or very unsafe? How could you make, what would be some practical things that you can do? So an important point in all of this is student voice. In a systemic way, solving the issue of school bullying is not about adults only carrying out the activities, but it's also about engaging students strongly in the process. So in the Australian context and in many other contexts around the world, probably in Kazakhstan, student voice is really important. That is, to hear what students have got to say and to value their opinions and see how those opinions can be translated. So could we have the next slide, please? So one of the issues that speakers have probably already covered concerns the definition of bullying, and I know that a number of speakers in your program will be addressing this issue in particular. In the Australian context, we define bullying as an abuse of power, and that abuse of power can be carried out by an individual or by a group, and that it's generally unfair, it's unjustified. And an important thing about bullying is that it's typically repeated, and that there can be different forms of bullying, as illustrated in the drawings that the children have done for me here, or the students have done for me. It can be physical, it can be verbal, or it can be cyber. And so I think an interesting activity is to use the YouTube, and one of the resources that have been developed here in Australia by an organisation have developed a particular YouTube clip that many of our classroom teachers use. So hopefully I can show that YouTube clip now. No, it's not activated. See that? So I'll just talk to the organisers just to see whether or not they can activate. Maybe I can.
Sure, we will show it on the screen right now.
Okay, thank you.
Ow! Stop it! Ow!
You don't need a black eye to be bullied.
Talk to a trusted adult if you've been cyberbullied, or visit the CyberSmart online helpline to talk to an experienced counsellor. If you have been cyberbullied, seek help from the CyberSmart online helpline.
So one of the things that has been developed here since 2014 is the appointment of what's called an e-safety commissioner in our national capital, Canberra. The e-safety commissioner has the brief of providing advice and lesson plans and activities for classroom teachers around the issue of online safety and online bullying. And so this is one of the YouTube clips that can be downloaded from the e-safety commissioner's website, and the Australian teachers can use this YouTube clip in their classroom teaching to prompt discussion with their students about cyberbullying, the nature of cyberbullying, how safety online, about digital citizenship, about being a good digital citizen, about issues associated with posting images, etc., on platforms like TikTok. And so the e-safety commissioner in Australia is very active around developing practical classroom resources that teachers can use to prompt discussion about the issue, in this instance, of cyberbullying. The next slide, please. So one of the issues associated with bullying is that we found, as 1994 showed in the initial report, that Australia is ranked kind of not at the top level, not at the lowest level of bullying nationally, but in the middle. But that means that in the current state, that about 1 in 5 students to 1 in 7 students are being bullied once a week or more often. Now, what we find in terms of the profile, the research that has been done by my research group, is that bullying is higher in our primary schools. So children aged from sort of 7 or 8 through to 11 or 12 in the primary schools, the bullying is highest amongst them. It's also highest in the lower years in our primary schools. So the years 3 and 4, the 8 and 9-year-olds in our schools tend to report higher levels of being bullied. But in secondary schools, it's highest in year 8 and 9. So amongst children or students aged 13 to 14, that's where the level of bullying is high as well. We also find that males in the Australian context say that they are bullied more than females, and that they report being bullied in different ways. Now, one of the things associated with bullying is the extent to which it lasts over time, because you remember in the definition, we talked about the fact that it's repeated. What we did in one of the longitudinal studies that we carried out over 5 years, where we followed students through from primary school through to secondary, is that if a student said that they were being bullied in primary school, there was a 53% chance that they were also going to be bullied in secondary school. So we know if bullying is happening to students in primary school, then it's likely to carry over into secondary school. And so the students there are at risk for being bullied in secondary school as well. We can do the next slide. So in the Australian context, if we looked at a visual representation of bullying, we would find that about 100,000 young people on a daily basis would report that they were being bullied once a week or more often. We could fill a football stadium that holds 100,000 spectators every day with the number of students that say that they are being bullied. So this is a real issue in the context of the Australian education system, as we'll see as we progress. So we do have a particular issue with that of bullying in the Australian schools that has to be addressed, and that's why the government has been looking at developing those programs and the policy associated with it. So we can do the next slide if you like. There are some fairly practical little activities that can be done easily by you as a classroom teacher. You would be familiar with the notion of a Y chart, and that it's very easy to have a simple classroom activity where you have a Y chart that illustrates that bullying looks like, and get the kids to fill in what the bullying looks like, bullying sounds like, what does bullying sound like, and what does bullying feel like. And then from a classroom activity point of view, use that Y chart to have a discussion with the students about the notion of bullying, the idea of what it looks, sounds and feels like, and what can be done to stop it, who can they talk to, what kind of resources can they draw upon to address the issue of bullying. Another simple activity that you might be familiar with as a classroom teacher would be using a sentence stem to present to students. So you could write up on the whiteboard something like bullying is, students who are bullied, boys will, girls with, or whatever you would like as a sentence beginning. Get the students to fill that in, then have a small group or a pair group discussion of what their responses were around the idea of bullying in order to make students more aware of the issue of bullying. And then another simple activity that has been used by many teachers, particularly art teachers in Australian schools, is have the students develop and design a poster that is positive and that looks at practical ideas for students to use to address the issue of bullying, and then have those posters put up in the school corridors or in the classrooms to take home to their parents. So I've used that kind of activity of a school poster to get the idea home to parents so that the students can show the parents, you know, what does bullying look like, feel like and sound like. And this is our ideas for presenting it. So the next slide, please. The link that we've established in Australia is that there is a significant link between bullying and well-being. So we do know through the research that we have done both here, and certainly your other presenters will be talking about the psychological consequences, that bullying is psychologically damaging. So it's associated with depression and anxiety. It's also socially isolating. It brings about periods of loneliness for young people, and it's physically harmful. In more extreme circumstances, it can lead to suicidal ideation and telomere erosion, which is a really harmful aspect physically for children. We might do the next slide, please. There's not only a physical and social cost and psychological cost to bullying, but a productivity commission in Australia has identified that bullying costs the Australian community over $500 million a year. So there is an actual economic cost. That economic cost comes about through the students having to go for counselling, having to be medicated because they are being bullied at school, missing school and staying away from school. Now, you can translate that $500 million, that $525 million, that would employ an additional 7,500 teachers a year in Australia. And those additional teachers, if we could minimise that cost, the physical cost or the economic cost of bullying, then that would free up a considerable part of the budget to employ extra teachers. So a question you might like to consider in your school and as a classroom teacher or practitioner or a psychologist is, you know, is the issue of bullying and violence in our Kazakhstan schools, what is it costing us in terms of students staying away from school, being afraid to go to school, needing medication, needing counselling in order to address the issue that is raised. So that's another question that you might like to consider in your own schools, in your own country and community. Next slide, please. We know that the neuroscience shows that there is a cumulative exposure to violence is associated with telomere erosion in children. So bullying is a serious thing that's equivalent to maternal or domestic violence, and that frequent bullying and victimisation bring about telomere erosion, which is the erosion of the synapses between the telomeres, which impacts on the child's development, brain development, and their ability to feel comfortable, make decisions. What we also know through the research that's been done, looking at that particular area, is that if the bullying is stopped, that some of that telomere erosion, which occurs naturally as we get older, so my telomeres are a lot shorter than your telomeres, I'm sure, that that telomere erosion can be offset if the bullying is identified early. Next slide, please. As I said in the introduction, particular interest of mine is vulnerable groups. And there are certain groups in our Australian schools who are particularly vulnerable to being bullied. We know that those particular groups are subject to more bullying, more serious bullying, and that it has significant consequences. So a discussion point, I think, again, for you in your classroom and in your schools and in your school community is, who are the vulnerable students in Kazakhstan schools? So, for example, the research that my research group has done, carried out here amongst children who have been identified as on the autism spectrum, is that they are 3 or 4 times more likely to say that they are bullied once a week or more often than students who are not on the autism spectrum. So children diagnosed or young people diagnosed with autism are significantly more likely and are significantly more vulnerable than other students in our school community in Australia. And if you look at research carried out in the United States and in the UK, a very similar pattern has emerged there, identifying that children on the autism spectrum are significantly at risk. Question you'd ask, that you might ask as a teacher, is who are the at-risk groups in our Kazakhstan schools? And what is it that we can do as teachers to address some of that? Next slide, please. I want to shift now to the notion of student wellbeing. Student wellbeing generally refers to the quality of one's life. So are you flourishing or not is a kind of measure of well-being. Next slide, please. One of the ways of addressing the issue of well-being is to improve mental health and to promote social and emotional learning competencies. And I know a number of the presenters for this webinar are going to be addressing the issue of social and emotional learning. But there are 5 key areas associated with social and emotional learning: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. These, when you analyse all of the areas associated with social emotional learning, these 5 key areas, self-awareness is the extent to which you have some insight into your behaviour. Self-management is the extent to which you can make responsible, good, strong decisions. Social awareness is where you are aware of the relationship making skills, how to make friends, how to keep friends. Relationship skills also cover that area, and the notion of responsible decision making. So how can students be encouraged to make good, strong, responsible decisions For example, they might have an image on their phone that they think is a fun idea to load up onto the web, but the responsible decision-making would lead them to pause and think about who they would be hurting, how much they would be hurting by loading an image up onto the web. So next slide, please. One of the simple and practical activities that teachers often use here, particularly amongst the primary school or the younger students, is a simple emotion meter. So again, it can encompass kind of art and drawing, or they can actually build a little emotion meter out of cardboard or any resources they've got in the classroom, and colour in faces from sad, as in red, to green, as in happy. And often in our classrooms, like I was talking to a teacher yesterday, and what the students do is that when they come into the classroom in the morning, they've each got their little emotion meter on a board, on a wall, and they go up and they point the arrow to where they're feeling as they walk into the classroom that morning. The teacher then can look at that at recess time and see that there's some students who are feeling very unhappy, and maybe approach those students and have a talk to them about what's happened that's meant that they're feeling very unhappy. Is something happening at home? Has something happened as they've been coming to school? Has something happened while they've been in school? So this is a really good little practical check that teachers can use that is quick and easy, and that can alert teachers to a student in their classroom or a couple of students in their classroom who are feeling very sad and unhappy, and give the teacher an opportunity to chat to them. Next slide, please. So why is mental health in schools important? Well, there's no doubt that improving students' mental health and well-being is positively associated with improving student academic performance. So we've established and published work with a very large sample of students here in Australia that would indicate that schools that attend to reducing bullying and promoting well-being actually help promote the students' academic achievement. It's not the other way around, that promoting students' academic achievement actually helps their well-being. It is, in fact, what we've found in our study in Australia, that it's the actual promotion of mental health and well-being that's what produces the academic achievement. Next slide, please. So the consequences for violence and ignoring violence in our school are very significant. What we know is that it affects the whole school community, students, parents, and teachers. Next slide, please. So in Australia, to reduce bullying, what we have determined and what we work to convince our education departments about is that to reduce bullying, we must increase the student well-being. And so we're basing that, as I've said, on evidence that shows that improving student well-being, reducing bullying, actually improves academic performance. Next slide, please. As a school, when you're thinking about interventions, what we focus on here in Australia is that there are different levels of intervention that a school can make. It can make it universally at whole populations. For example, if you immunise the whole population against flu or COVID, then it has an impact. That's a universal intervention. It can be identified as a population at risk. For example, we know in Australia that girls in that 14 to 16 age range through social media, etc., are particularly at risk. Or it can be the intervention in your school and your classroom can be indicatively, you can identify, as I've already noted, students who are particularly at risk, like children and young people on the autism spectrum, and that you can devise an intervention based around that group of students. So there are different levels of intervention that you as a teacher might like to engage in with your school, or the school might like to engage in. Next slide, please. So two programs to address bullying and promote wellbeing that I've been strongly associated with. One of those is the P.E.A.C.E. It's a program for reducing bullying and promoting wellbeing. And the second one is Big Talks for Little People, a child mental health module. So the P.E.A.C.E. is an actual package of materials, of lesson plans, of activities and guidelines for teachers that is used. And the second one is the Big Talks for Little People, is a digital online big program that teachers can put up on their smart board. Again, it comprises of a number of different lessons, etc., that teachers can use. Next slide, please. So very quickly, the P.E.A.C.E. has been used here in over 150 schools in Australia. It's been translated into Greek and used in 300 schools in Greece. It's been used and translated into Japanese. In Italy, it's been translated and is used there in Italian schools and in Malta. And there are some activities involved in America with the P.E.A.C.E. Next slide, please. So as I said, the P.E.A.C.E. is an actual physical resource with lesson plans, with 8 lesson plans with activities for teachers, practical activities. It's also been developed developmentally so that it's used. There is a version for primary schools and another version for secondary schools that are part of the P.E.A.C.E. program. Next slide, please. So the philosophy of the P.E.A.C.E. is based around the notion, the Gandhian notion of moral force, where peace is not a passive thing, but it's an active thing that's born out of the notion of truth, non-violence, and insistence or holding to a truth or a non-violence, so that the idea that bullying is a bad thing and that holding to that particular view is an important part of the P.E.A.C.E. program. Next slide, please. So PEACE is an acronym. It describes a process that schools move through in implementing the P.E.A.C.E. program in your school. PEACE is, the P is for preparation, the E is for education, the A is to identify the action that a school and classroom can take, C is for coping and teaching coping skills to students, and E is for evaluation. And evaluating the effectiveness of the program is really important. Next slide, please. So when we've evaluated the program for 15,000, over 15,000 students, and this is in over 120 schools across Australia, we find that there are reductions in students saying that they're being victimised. There are reductions in them saying that some students bully others. And we also find that that increases students' knowledge for coping skills and feeling safer at school. Next slide, please. So, as I've said, the P.E.A.C.E. has got 8 lessons that teachers typically deliver across a week-long period. And what we've found when we've analysed the data that we collect at the beginning of the 8 lessons, the first lesson at the end of the 8 lessons, is that there is a significant reduction in the students saying that they're being bullied once a week or more often. And that lasts, and when we do follow up 3 months later at the 3rd data collection point, we find that the effect is even greater. Next slide, please. Here is data from one secondary school that I've worked in here in Adelaide in South Australia. When I started this work in the school in 2014, the level of bullying was about 17%, represented by the blue line. But after the P.E.A.C.E had been introduced over 8 weeks, it dropped to 14%. In 2015, the level of bullying was much lower already, and it dropped again after the intervention. 2016, slightly higher, but dropped again after the intervention. 2017, the school had managed to reduce bullying from 17% to 7%. And that means that students are a lot safer in the school situation. Next slide, please. So in summary, classroom teachers can improve the mental health and well-being of their students. That's what the P.E.A.C.E program has demonstrated. It can reduce bullying. It does reduce and improve, it does improve academic performance. And so a question that I ask you as a teacher or someone working in schools with students, what would be the barriers to promoting peace education in Kazakhstan schools? How would you go about promoting it? What would be the value of doing that? What kind of discussion could you have in your staff room with other teachers about implementing that program? Next slide, please. Here are 3 possible lessons that you could use for secondary school students, where in lesson 1, you can have them work in groups to brainstorm ideas about the nature and definition of bullying. You could use clips from YouTube to illustrate this, maybe develop a class poster. Next week, you could have the students think about what they had learnt about bullying, and then ideas for promoting more peaceful and safer peer relations, and then share some of those ideas in the classroom. And then the following week in lesson 3, working in pairs, practical ideas for stopping bullying. What could students, or what do students think they could do using student voice to promote a more peaceful classroom and school environment? So these are some simple, practical 3 lessons that teachers often use in the context of the Australian classroom. Next slide, please. There is a P.E.A.C.E website that you can look at in your own time, and I'm happy to answer any questions and reply to any queries that you might make of that website. Next slide, please. So I want to talk about a new program now called Big Talks for Little People. It's a child mental health module. It's typically used with children in primary schools, those children up to 12 years of age or 13 years of age. Next slide, please.
Are we okay, Mr. Slee? Dr. Slee, do you copy?
Professor?
Dr. Slee.
Professor Slee?
Professor Slee, do you copy?
Welcome to Big Talks for Little People. In this program, we will be exploring important topics about well-being. Wellbeing is about being comfortable, healthy, and happy. What do you do to be healthy? Eating good food, exercising, and playing, as well as cleaning your teeth and getting plenty of sleep. Our well-being depends on this. But well-being is about our mental health too. Mental health is how we are feeling on the inside. You are never too young or too old to talk about mental health. Let's talk about emotions. The truth is, there is no such thing as a bad emotion. Every emotion we have is important. Your emotions are a natural reaction to something that is happening around you. Let's talk about feelings. Sometimes it's easy to see how someone feels by how they show their emotions. But sometimes how we feel on the inside might not be what we show on the outside because we are thinking about the past or future. Our feelings belong to us. No one else knows exactly how you feel because they are not you. You are you. In fact, we're all different and we might not always feel the same way. Being able to share our feelings with people we trust is important for our mental health.
So, okay. So that, if you move to the next slide, yep, I need to go there. Okay, thank you. So the Big Talks for Little People is a module that is online and digital that the teachers can download from a digital website. It's got 6 practical lessons around social emotional learning. What I've just shown you, or what you can watch on the PowerPoint presentation, are animations, and those animations involve cartoon-like characters. We've deliberately developed those so that there's no gender associated with them, and there's very limited language so that it can children in non-English speaking children in our classrooms can understand it. There are information sheets on topics such as child anxiety and trauma-informed teaching. There's also an online teacher professional development PowerPoint, and the questionnaire for students and a questionnaire for teachers. So that gives you a bit of an idea of the Big Talks for Little People. And the next slide, please. So we know, and you know as a teacher, that kids come into your classroom with a range of issues. In Australia context, about 1 in 7 children and adolescents have got some form of mental disorder, anxiety, depression, etc. There are also relationship problems that children might have both at home and at school. There are significant eating and body image issues, particularly around social media, bullying and cyberbullying, as I've talked about in this program, different forms of physical, emotional, sexual abuse that children are subject to, worry or anxiety, and self-harm or suicide. Next slide, please. So just a practical classroom activity that you as a classroom teacher can use is to get an idea about what constitutes friendship, because one of the key elements of social emotional learning is relationship skills. So having this kind of little motif where you've got filled in a good friend is someone who cares about you, listens to you, respects, and then get kids to fill in what they think a good friend is, and then have a discussion with the person sitting next to them or in small groups, elaborates and develops their idea of friendship and what friendship means to them. Next slide, please. Again, just very quickly, because I'm aware of the time, the financial cost of mental illness amongst young people aged 12 to 25 years in the Australian context is over $10 billion. That comes about through the issue of mental health and ill health and well-being, means that there is issues associated with loss of employment, disability, etc. So Australia has currently a substantial cost arising from mental illness in young people that we have to address. Next slide, please. So to finish the presentation, I would like to show then one of the animations, 30-second animations that we use in the Big Talks for Little People. Thank you. We don't need to repeat that. We can go back to the PowerPoint. So just a little glitch here. No, I don't want to do that one. So the next, okay. So just to finish with the presentation tonight, and I thank you for your patience, is that in that animation, we use the animation with the P.E.A.C.E, who are the little characters, illustrating a certain point. In this case, it was about one of the P.E.A.C.E feeling sad and another child then breaking off and sitting next to them, not solving their problem, but just being with them is sufficient. So we use that in the classroom to get teachers to talk about with their children, what do you think is happening here? How is the P.E.A.C.E feeling? If you saw this happening with someone, what would you do, etc. And so the P.E.A.C.E then are little prompts that allow the classroom teacher to talk to the children about feelings and emotions, about mental health and well-being. Next slide, please. These are the P.E.A.C.E, and there are about 8 or 9 of them in the animation that are used, and there are various animations that we use around depression, anxiety, friendship making, risk taking, resilience, etc. Next slide, please. So to finish with, we've evaluated the Big Talks for Little People, and what we've found is that in schools here in South Australia, that there was a significant improvement in student wellbeing across the 6 lessons. There was a reduction in student anxiety, and there was a 20% reduction in bullying. Teachers generally regarded the animations as really helpful, and the students also appreciated the cartoon-like characters and the opportunity to talk about their feelings. Next slide, please. So what I've provided there are some references to this, the material that I've talked about today, and those references are there. Next slide, please. So in Indigenous language, I would say to you Nakutha, which is the Kaurna language of the people here in Adelaide, and it would, if I said Nakutha to you, it would be, I'll hope to see you later. I'd like to thank you for your patience. I'd like to thank, particularly as we've worked through some glitches in the presentation, And I'd like to thank the moderator and Daria for their patience in leading me through this, and also for your time that you've given up to be as part of this. I like the idea that you as a teacher will not go where the path may lead. You're actually trailblazing, you're making where there is no path, and what you will do as a teacher and somebody working in schools, a support person, a psychologist, a social worker, is that you will leave a trail where you go. Thank you very much, everyone.
Спасибо огромное, Филипп.
Thank you very much, Philip.
A pleasure.
All of our participants are writing in the chat. I wish you could read Russian. They are texting, thank you so much to Dr. Slee. It's a very interesting topic. They also write this, they're writing this in English too. Thank you for raising very important issues. We have a few questions to you, sir. These are the questions from the audience. Distinguished Professor, the issues that you've discussed are quite relevant, but what is the situation with the university level bullying in Australia and bullying in families? Do you take any measures to stop bullying at universities and in families? And could you please let us know what are your contact details to contact you?
Thank you. That's a very thoughtful question. All universities in Australia have got anti-bullying or anti-harassment policies and practices in place. They would, at my university, they regularly hold sessions for new students coming to university around the issue of what is bullying, how it manifests itself, the different types of bullying and what to do about it and who to report to on campus. So the situation in our higher degree institutions now, and this is more recent than not, is that they do have policies and practices in place to address the issue of school bullying. The other point that you made about bullying in families is a really significant one. What we've found is that the issue of sibling bullying is a significant one, that often children will report that, yes, they are being bullied at school, but they'll also report that they are being bullied by their brother or sister at home. And so the notion that we have developed in the P.E.A.C.E and also in the Big Talks for Little People is that bullying is systemic. It's not just the responsibility of the school to address it, but that the community, the families must be involved in that process, and that it's really important for families and the community to understand that bullying, while it may happen in schools, often arises in the families or in the community and comes into the school. And so the school then is often identified as where the bullying is caused and where it happens, but in fact it's happened out in the families or in the community and it comes into the school. So I appreciate that question. That's a really important issue to raise, and to see that the issue of bullying is a systemic issue. It's not solely the responsibility of the school or the teacher. Certainly they have a pivotal role to play, but that awareness of it in the community is a really significant one as well. I'm more than happy to answer any queries that would be sent to you by my email, and I think the email is located on my PowerPoint presentation. So feel free to send me any queries that you do have. So thank you for that question. It's a really important one.
Спасибо огромное за ответ и за возможность.
Thank you very much for your answer and for letting us writing you personally and directly. We have quite a lot of bullying researchers in our event, and I believe that if they stay in touch with you, that would be great. And Now, speaking of ideas and the practical work, there's a comment. I echo you. We can say that the feelings that bullying triggers in witnesses of bullying is an important thing. Do you think that well-being of students is one of the criteria of the prevention of bullying?
Again, that's a really thoughtful question to ask. I think I know that some of you, the presenters that maybe have already presented or will be coming, will be talking about bystanders, and that we know that the issue of bullying is not simply about two people or two individuals, the bully and the victim, but that the group around them, their peers around them, play different roles. So the bystanders can play one of the roles that bystanders play is to actively support the bully and promote the bullying, and actively provide support for the bully to engage in that kind of behaviour. There are other bystanders who will simply stand by and watch it happening. And so that bystander effect that was identified many, many years ago by Latan and Dali is really important. It's kind of like people gathering in Australia. Just recently, we've had some really bad fires in one of our towns here, and the fire service had real problems in getting to the fires because people from the town were going out to have a look at the fires. They were not doing anything practical. They were just watching it happen. So that can happen in a bullying situation where individuals will just stand around and watch it happening but not do anything. There are another small group of students who will actually defend. So the bystanders, you get those that support the bullying, you get those that simply watch it happening, but that you also get individuals who will try and defend, and they will speak up on behalf of the victim. And that's a very practical solution to present to an individual, a child or a student who is being bullied. Is there somebody, another student that you can go and talk to that could act as your advocate, that could help you talk and present your ideas about stopping bullying to the person who is engaging in that behaviour? We do know from the work that's been done in Canada in particular that where a defender actually speaks up and says, don't do that to that person, don't do that bullying, that it actually stops really quickly. But that takes a lot of courage. And I think that what we know for the work that we've done here in Australia is that there are many reasons why children and young people won't actually act as defenders. In primary school, we find that the Australian children think that it's the teacher's job to stop the bullying. But the issue there is that the bullying often happens out of sight of the teachers, and particularly if it's online and on the weekend, the teacher is not aware of it. As the children get older and they move into secondary school, they emphasise not that it's the teacher's job, but they say that it's none of my business. If somebody is being bullied, they should stick up for themselves. They should do something about it. It's not my job to help them. So as the children develop and grow older, their reasons for not being a bystander actually change. And so as a primary school teacher and as a secondary school teacher, I think it's worthwhile being aware that the students in your classroom have different reasons for not stepping in and helping someone. The other reason that students won't help someone and defend it and speak up is that they're afraid that if they do, they will become a target. And so the other reason that both the younger and the older students do say in our research is that, well, if I said something or I did something or I reported it to the teacher, then I would be next. I would be getting bullied. So that's why I don't do it. So there are some very sound reasons why students won't act as defenders. But I think that as teachers, we need to be aware that there are different developmental reasons why students will or won't step in and stop the bullying. So again, that's another excellent question to consider from a practical classroom perspective.
Thank you very much for your answer. And there is a follow-up question. Many participants are writing that they would like to read your papers, your research. Maybe you can send us any links or let us know where we can read or download your materials, your research papers.
Yes, I'm more than happy to do that. I can send a link to you that you could then distribute, and I'm happy for that material and those contexts to be distributed. I think that some of the research and the papers that we've published are very practical. They are focused very much on the classroom setting to give teachers ideas about what they can do. Some are more theoretical about the philosophy behind bullying and the theories behind bullying. So I have a range of different papers that I can make available to the attendees if they would like to read those.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor. There's an interesting question. I cannot but ask it. I was listening to one political scientist who said high fertility causes violence in young people. Is there any link between fertility rate and the birth rate and violence? Like the more people there are in the society, the more violence is.
That is that's a particularly interesting question, because here in Australia at the moment, in an effort to address in an effort to address and provide facilities for children, they have created what we call super schools. These are schools where there are very large numbers of students. So in past years, primary schools varied in terms of the numbers, but they were typically had small numbers of students involved, and the teachers knew the students, and even across the different grade levels, teachers would be aware of who the student's name, they'd be aware of the students themselves and their backgrounds. As the students then move into secondary schools, and particularly into our super schools, where we've brought together much larger numbers of students, then what happens is, we think, is that students, particularly as they move from primary into secondary school, move into a secondary school environment where they are relatively anonymous. They don't have a friendship network. They don't have somebody that they can talk to easily, and that they feel that they are not well known. So a part of my answer to that excellent question by your attendee, listener, is that I think that this is a new factor, particularly in the Australian context, and it may apply in Kazakhstan as well and in other countries, that the larger the school is, that potentially there is potential there for a greater level of bullying and violence. I think that would be for us in Australia, that's a very interesting research question that we don't have an easy answer for at the moment.
Thank you. This is good that we can see new research ideas emerging, and let's hope maybe some of them will be joint efforts. Also, about bullying based on the national reason. You have the indigenous people, and you might see this. Is there any bullying from those who have moved to Canada? Maybe they are bullying. Maybe they bully the indigenous people, or maybe vice versa. Maybe indigenous people bully foreigners more.
Yes, that's again, I'm really interested, as I said right at the beginning of my presentation, to learn as much from you as you may learn from me. And so I'm really interested in these questions because they prompt me to think about the research that we've done. Some of the research that we had done early on showed that Indigenous people were not significantly more bullied than non-Indigenous people. So Australia has a very multicultural background. So because of the way that Australia has been settled, we have well over half the population come from different cultures, so that you can go into a school and you'll have many, many different cultures present there. We don't find that, generally speaking, that there is an increased level of bullying either amongst the Indigenous people by non-Indigenous people, or that there is a level of bullying that might be associated with membership in a cultural group. So bullying in the Australian context seems a little separate from whether one is Indigenous or not, or whether one comes from a different cultural background or not. The bullying that we seem to be seeing in Australia over the years is prompted by other factors. But that doesn't mean that that's not changing. And again, I think that's an important prompt for me to go back and have a look at that literature and see in the Australian context whether there's any new evidence that there may be bullying amongst the Indigenous, or more amongst people from different cultures. But at the moment, the research doesn't indicate that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Bullying prevention in Australia, is it a private initiative of those people who cannot tolerate this, or this is the initiative of the government?
It's the initiative of the government, because one of the things that researchers and here in Australia have been heavily involved in right across all of the states and territories is lobbying the government about the actual need to have policy and programs in place, and that those policies and programs must have evidence that they do work. So here in South Australia, for example, in Adelaide, in the Education Department, the Education Department has now got a list of programs that teachers and schools can access, where there is some published evidence that those programs actually make a positive difference to reducing bullying and improving well-being. So it's not a private action, as the question asked. It is now, it's not a law, but it's a responsibility of every school, whether it's public or private, to have in place bullying policy and programs. So every school in Australia must have in place a policy about school bullying. They must disseminate that information to teachers, to their school community. It must go home to the parents so that the parents are aware of what the school's policy is. The parents are aware of the programs that are in place. So it is not a private initiative, but it's with the government We have lobbied the government extensively since 1994 for exactly that point, that there must be in our schools the responsibility for the schools to have that policy and those programs in place, and that must be communicated clearly to the students and also to the parents and the community. So again, that's a really important question, because an issue for us when we were lobbying our politicians here, both at the federal level and at the state level, was we didn't need it to be a law, because there were issues associated with, well, what would happen if a school broke the law and didn't have a policy or program in place. Rather, we've used a kind of moral force to say that, to educate our politicians, to educate the people who make the policy, that bullying is harmful. It has a cost associated with it, both psychologically, socially, and economically, and that it's in the best interests of the school that they have a policy in place and they have programs in place to reduce bullying, because we now know, and this is what we take to our politicians, we now know that if you improve well-being and reduce bullying, it actually increases the academic performance of the students. And that's what teachers want.
Спасибо, Филипп, за развернутый ответ.
Thank you, Philip, for your extended answer. And 2 more questions. We understand that we're taking it so long, but still. In the follow-up, is there any algorithm of actions in case of bullying? Okay, we have identified a bullying case. What's the algorithm? Is there any algorithm? What should be done next by the teacher, by the school, by the parent, by the student? Is there any algorithm like the schema?
Again, that is a really thoughtful question, and that's the one that I was presented with today, because I'm working to do a presentation to teachers, because at the moment we've had some really violent incidents in our school, particularly amongst girls. And there are issues for the teachers when girls, these are older girls, these are so these are girls that are 14 and 15 years of age, who are seen engaging at lunchtime or in the classroom or at recess time, which we have here. They actually pick physical fights with another girl. And the teachers may do that in front of the teachers who are on yard duty. So I don't know whether your teachers in Kazakhstan do yard duty. Maybe you could tell me whether or not they do. But in Australia, our teachers are in the yard at lunchtime and recess time. And if a fight breaks out, there are real problems for the teachers, because our teachers are very reluctant to actually physically intervene and separate the girls. So the question that was put to me today was exactly the one that your attendee has just asked. What is the algorithm, or what should happen when a bullying incident is identified or seen? So I think the simple answer to that is that, and this depends, and this is my ignorance around Kazakhstan and your education system, so I'm more than happy to be corrected, that in the Australian context, schools must take some action. So that action can involve in-school suspension, or the students may be suspended from coming to school. If it's an act of violence, the police may be called in. If it's determined that it's not quite as significant as that, but it's nonetheless a significant incident of bullying, then the counsellor in the school or the psychologist will request a meeting with the parent and bring the parents in. And then, so the short answer to that really complex question is that in our schools, teachers must take some action, and they must be supported by the administration in the school to take that action. So if a teacher sees an incident, then they must report it. And it's the responsibility of the administration to make sure that that incident is logged, that's identified, it's written down, and that the outcomes are followed up to see what happened after the counselling occurred or after the parents were interviewed, etc., so that the children and the young people can know that something did happen and it resulted in some positive action. So I'm hopeful that that's answered the question that your attendee has asked. It's a really complex and a really thoughtful question.
Спасибо. Спасибо.
Thank you very much. We are forced to suspend the Q&A session. Questions are coming in tons, and your beautiful word, Nakura, see you in the future, means that we are hoping to have another meeting with you in the future. People really liked your presentation, and we appreciate your sharing with your practices. Certainly, we would like to dive deeper in your programs like Big Talks for Little People and Peace Program. And really, it would be nice diving into it. And I hope that our participants will study those sources. And we would like to have more meetings with you. And maybe we could also discuss the issue of translating these sources into Kazakhstani language, into Russian language, for these to be widespread in this part of the world. We really appreciate your studies of this subject, bullying, and we hope to see you in the future.
I really appreciate those thoughts, and I really valued the attendees' questions. As I've said, I've really appreciated your understanding generally as we've worked our way through some of the glitches in my technology and my lack of my ignorance around how to make the best of the time available in terms of the presentation. I think it would be really exciting from my point of view if I could understand a little more around your country, your education system, the issues that face the teachers. And I would really value the opportunity to dive a little deeper particularly with the programs that we've developed around Big Talks for Little People and or the P.E.A.C.E, to see what use could be made of them as we've made in the other countries, like Italy and Greece and Malta and Japan, and where we've translated the material. That would be a invaluable learning experience for me and my team if we could have that opportunity. So it's been very generous time that you've given me tonight or today to make this presentation, and I really have appreciated it, and I mean that from the heart. It's been a learning experience for me, and I'll reflect on some of the questions that your attendees have asked, and that will give me pause for thought, and then I'll be able to take that, and that enriches my life. So I think the value for me is often much greater in these presentations than it can be for the people involved, because I learn so much from it. So thank you again.
Спасибо, Филипп. Спасибо огромное.
Thank you, Philip. Thank you so much, and see you in the future. Nakura.
We will. Nakura.
Коллеги, наш рабочий день не